The question of who died first in the timeline of the Five Nights at Freddy's series is one of the most debated topics in the entire franchise. Unlike many horror stories that present events in chronological order, this series deliberately reveals information out of sequence. Each game introduces fragments of the past through minigames, newspaper clippings, dialogue, and environmental hints. Because of this fragmented storytelling, identifying the very first death in the timeline requires comparing clues from multiple titles such as Five Nights at Freddy's 2, Five Nights at Freddy's 4, Five Nights at Freddy, Sister Location, and Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. Several different possibilities exist, and each interpretation depends on how a person reconstructs the hidden timeline of the series. One major candidate for the first death is Charlotte Emily, often called Charlie by fans. She's the daughter of Henry Emily, the business partner of William Afton and co-founder of the Freddy Fazbear Company. In later lore, particularly in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, it is strongly implied that Charlotte was murdered outside a restaurant by William Afton. Her body was discovered near a security puppet animatronic designed to protect children. In the minigame depicting the event, the puppet reaches her body and becomes possessed by her spirit. The significance of this event is enormous because the puppet later appears to be responsible for giving life to the other haunted animatronics. In several scenes, it is suggested that the puppet helped place the spirits of murdered children into the suits of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. If Charlotte died first, then her death would have set the entire supernatural chain of events into motion. This interpretation is widely accepted by many fans because it explains how the animatronics became haunted in the first place. However, another major possibility involves the crying child from Five Nights at Freddy's 4. This character is a young boy who is terrified of the animatronics and constantly bullied by his older brother. Throughout the game's minigames, he is shown being tormented by the other children and eventually forced into the mouth of a Fredbear animatronic during his birthday party. The animatronic's springlock jaw closes on his head, causing the infamous incident known as the Bite of 83. The child later dies in the hospital, as suggested by the final scene showing a flatline sound and fading dialogue. Some fans believe this boy may have been the first death in the entire timeline. According to this interpretation, his death occurred before the major murders committed by William Afton. His tragedy would represent the first fatal accident connected to the animatronic restaurants, potentially inspiring later paranoia and fear around the characters. There is also the possibility that Elizabeth Afton died first. Elizabeth is the daughter of William Afton and becomes the spirit possessing Circus Baby in Sister Location. Her death occurs when she approaches the Circus Baby animatronic against her father's warnings. The machine captures her using a hidden claw designed to lure and trap children. While many people place this event later in the timeline, some interpretations argue that Circus Baby's Pizza World may have been one of the earliest experimental projects created by William Afton. If that were true, Elizabeth's death could technically precede the other tragedies. In this scenario, William's experiments with child-capturing animatronics would begin with the creation of Circus Baby, and Elizabeth would become the first victim of his own dangerous designs. There is also a more unusual theory that suggests an unknown child could have died even earlier than the commonly discussed characters. This theory arises from small environmental hints scattered throughout the games. Certain minigames show children disappearing or animatronics behaving strangely before the more clearly documented incidents. Because the series leaves many gaps in its timeline, it is possible that earlier tragedies occurred but were never fully shown on screen. In this interpretation, the known victims such as Charlotte, the crying child Elizabeth, and the missing children may only represent the first deaths that the player learns about rather than the actual first death chronologically. The debate often focuses most heavily on Charlotte Emily and the crying child because their deaths represent two different types of events. Charlotte's death is a deliberate murder committed by William Afton, while the crying child's death appears to be an accidental tragedy caused by bullying and faulty animatronic design. If the series intends to emphasize William Afton as the origin of the evil within the story, then Charlotte dying first makes narrative sense. Her murder would mark the beginning of Afton's crimes and the creation of the haunted animatronics through the puppet. On the other hand, if the timeline aims to show a gradual escalation of disasters surrounding the restaurants, then the crying child dying first would represent the earliest sign that something was terribly wrong with the animatronic entertainment concept. Later revelations in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator strengthen the argument that Charlotte was the first victim. In Henry Emily's final speech during the ending, he refers to his daughter as having been lost very early in the story. The puppet's role in guiding the other spirits also suggests that her death occurred before the missing children incident. If she had not already been possessing the puppet, it would be difficult to explain how the other children became bound to the animatronics. Even with this evidence, the series never explicitly states the exact chronological order of every death. The storytelling style intentionally encourages players to piece together the timeline themselves, often leading to multiple plausible interpretations. Because of that ambiguity, discussions about the first death continue to evolve whenever new information appears in later games or related media. In conclusion, several different characters could potentially be considered the first death in the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline. Charlotte Emily is the most widely accepted candidate because her spirit becomes the puppet and appears to initiate the haunting of the animatronics. The crying child from Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is another strong possibility, representing the earliest fatal accident involving the animatronics. Elizabeth Afton could theoretically be the first victim if the Circus Baby project predates the other restaurants. Because the series reveals its history in fragments rather than clear chronological order, the identity of the first victim remains one of the most fascinating and debated mysteries in the entire franchise.